Hello, what's up? This is Brent, Purify Word Soul. Bloodstained has been out for several months now. The game is great. Everybody likes it. Most everybody likes it. There's Iga there holding the book that we gave him for his birthday. Everything has been wonderful. You couldn't ask for much more as far as how well everything went, how good the game is. I could talk about Bloodstained and how I feel about all that for hours on end, but we're going to focus today on just the story elements and where I think the game is going, what the characters have done, where they could be heading. There's Bloodless playing basketball. I love that image. Shout outs to Mizu, who makes a lot of our emotes on the Discord. There's Iga and IGA. So I am the administrator of the Bloodstained official Discord and the forum, and I have a leadership role otherwise several other places as a fan. I'm not a member of the art play team or 505 games, but I am quite involved in everything, and I don't have any inside knowledge, but I have a lot of ideas about where things might be headed. So you should pause and check out that poster I made of Simon. But yeah, I'm just going to go through each character as they appear in the game. And while I do so, you can enjoy my silly images. So, spoilers. First of all, obviously, if you haven't beaten the game yet, please do that first. I'm going to cover things that are obviously going to go into deep detail of how the game plays out, so I would prefer, even if you might not be sure, I would rather you beat the game first. So if Mana, Angel, or someone else on the team sees this, don't tell Igarashi that I'm onto him. If anything, after the fact, you can say, well, Brent knew you would do this. For future reference, when I talk about the prequel, what I'm referring to is the game I believe that they will do to cover the events of 10 years prior to Ritual of the Night. So okay, let's get into it, and the characters in the order that they appear in the game. First of all is Miriam. She's Soma, basically. I believe that Ritual of the Night is pretty much Aria of Sorrow. So her story is pretty much, I think, 2/3 done. I think Dawn, the Dawn of Sorrow equivalent, may still be to come, and the part she plays in a follow-up game, limited to just one follow-up game, I would say, may have her play a Julius mode style part where she can become the villain, even. I think that Iga played it safe with Ritual of the Night, still in regard to the corruption of the main character being a factor or not. And it turned out it wasn't really a factor at all. We kind of perceived along the way, as the game was being developed, that corruption would be a bigger deal in Ritual, which it really wasn't, because we knew back when he was making Symphony, that was a concept early on with Alucard, that there would be a system where if you used the dark powers too much, it would change the progression of the game, and it would have some consequence. And we figured that would be the case with Miriam, but it turns out to be kind of a smokescreen, with Dominique telling you it would be bad, but she just wants your shards. Anyway, I think the reason why he played it safe here is because this would have limited the player. These games should have you feeling strong, not to give you pause in pursuing the grind. Instead, for Ritual of the Night, the thing that was giving you pause was only psychological at most, like trying to guilt you into thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't use the shards. But it's all after you get to know what the game's really about. Especially New Game Plus, and once you're late game, you're like, oh, it doesn't matter at all. I can just feel free to get strong, which is how video games should feel. You want to feel overpowered, and you want that pursuit of being powerful to be a focus of an Igarashi Mania game. So, you got to balance that, and that might be why they didn't end up doing it with Alucard. So in a follow-up game, I think you can take more risks and play with expectations more, even the genre more. Because the quintessential, predictable Igavania style of game that was wanted has been done now. Of course, we want more of that, and more will come. But now he has a little bit more room that he can kind of play with the ideas that we expect from him. he can, in the future, he can take these further risks with the consequences of corruption in perhaps a way that doesn't limit the player too much. So in prequels, changing gears a little bit here, I think Miriam in the prequels will just be a background character, kind of. I think in sequels, even past the second game I'm talking about, I think she's not as likely to appear after her Dawn of Sorrow equivalent, but not as likely to appear, but an important character in the saga for being the first successful and as yet strongest Shardbinder. So I think she's establishing the saga, and she's going to be an important character down the line. I wouldn't say a Leon Belmont type character, because I think a lot of things are going to happen in the past before Bloodstained, but kind of a very important middle of the saga character who you'll be hearing about, for generations to come in Bloodstained. For relationships, for Miriam, another topic I'm just going to cover this kind of categorically as I go through the characters. For relationships for Miriam, I would definitely respect if Miriam just stayed single. I think that is appropriate and good for today's time, that a female protagonist not have her identity tied to a relationship with a man, of course. If it so works out, however, then that's good. I just don't see one forming with any of the established characters right now. It would kind of have to be forced a little bit, or just kind of be weird in the context that as we understand the characters currently. If anyone, maybe Zangetsu, but that seems... I don't know if I'm ready for that either. That's kind of weird too. No offense to any Miriam Zangetsu fans out there, because I think that's cool. I wouldn't mind seeing that, but it does seem it's too soon right now, at least. So, next character to appear is, of course, Johannes, or Johannes. We used to think it was Johannes, but apparently it is Johannes, which I think I would prefer, because it makes him more of a Joestar character, right? So, Johannes is more interesting than you might expect. In Johannes' original art, he was drawn with a whip on his belt, and I swear I'm not imagining this. I've looked again recently, and it's got to be a whip. Anyway, I'll go ahead and bring up this possibility now. The sword versus whip poll from before the campaign start. This was to determine the strongest weapon that was going to be in the game. That was the purpose of the poll, the sword or whip poll. And I don't think that meant stat-wise, but instead which weapon would become the new vampire killer of the story. Is like the iconic whip, the thing that was the strongest weapon in the Castlevania story, and the whole lineage of characters was that whip. A lot of things were tied around the usage and inheritance of that weapon. It seems that since the sword won in the poll, and Katana was the highest voted weapon clan, subsequently, the Zangetsu sword, the Zangetsuto, became the new vampire killer. I think that's what's happened here. I think Zangetsu's sword, which is what the Zangetsu is named for, it's not the other way around. The sword names the Zangetsu people. I think that has become the new VK. It's the new vampire killer. And it's passed down through generations of people who are called Zangetsu. And they are named for the sword. I think that's really cool. And it actually makes more sense, both in context and being an heirloom fighting demons and all that. It adds up better to me than a whip, if you think about it. But and of course it being contextually pretty cool. I think I like the idea of the sword even better than a whip, even though I'm a huge whip fan. And to be honest with you, like with the polls going on, I thought we were voting for what genre of game Bloodstained would be. So I really screwed up. I spammed votes for Sword Clan, Katana, actually, without realizing what it really meant. And, well, I don't know how much effect it really had on how things turned out. But, yeah, I was like, whip must mean Classic Vania, and sword must mean Iga Vania. And I spammed all those votes for Iga Vania because I thought, that's what sword meant, but, whatever. It's fine. So anyway, this leaves Johannes as potentially who we might be looking at if Whip had taken that vote, right? If it was that important, and sword won, making the Zangetsuto the vampire killer. What if Whip had won? Would that change the role of the Zangetsu character? Would it not be Zangetsu anymore, but would Johannes be in that role if Whip had won? And it's hard to imagine him as a fighting protagonist now, for sure. But what if he was going to become a Johannes Joestar? What if, he's hiding some kind of power? Like maybe he's like Igarashi himself. He's like this power under control kind of persona. Like he's really calm and cool. But when he needs to kick ass and protect Miriam and let loose, the glasses come off and the hair comes down and he's been lifting and he's just whipping the shit out of everybody. But I don't think that's plausible, but hey, that could be the case. There's another character who could have filled that role too, and I'll talk about her a little later. Anyway, prequels for Johannes as he is now, not the theoretical I've been talking about, but prequels for Johannes as he is now, or as he was before. I think his position in a prequel would be a bit more involved than Miriam's role, because I think her main story has been done already, like I said. But I think Johannes would still be a background character in the prequel. For sequels, I think he will halt Miriam's corruption, in so much as the curse physically taking her body completely, of course, but her mind is still her own. And that's kind of where I was coming from with the idea that she could even be a villain role later, because I could see Johannes growing in power to rival Alfred's. And at that point, he would be a younger and potentially playable Alfred. Johannes will likely become a series master alchemist, I think, and the beginning of it being taught how to regulate the power of shardbinders if they are to come around again. I think that would be kind of the story focus of him, is like talking about how in the future generations after Miriam, he kind of writes out and explains to the people that have come from Johannes's line how to control and regulate shardbinders if and when they come about. But anyway, I think Miriam could have her corruption halted and completely controlled, but it doesn't stop her, like, mentally from perhaps the pursuit of power. That's all reliant on her character and how she can handle so much strength. And I think she's a very strong character. I think she can handle it. But it would, be interesting too if there is an alternate path in the next game where she struggles with it and you have to help take her down in a alternate heroes versus Miriam situation, kind of again like Julius mode. But that's just one idea. I don't think that'll be the main focus of the next game. I think it'll be more like Ritual of the Night, just with the possibility of that being there so that Iga can kind of play with the expectations, like I was saying. Anyway, back to Johannes, the closing thing for him. Relationships. Again, none yet that I could see. But I could see him taking a wife and more immediately probably taking care of Anne, if not straight out adopting her, because you think about Anne at the close of Ritual of the Night. She doesn't have anybody, and the most capable and likely people to help her out are Johannes and Miriam. So, as they're walking away from the village, I hope they, decide, well, what about Anne? They could leave her with the rest of the village. They could stay in the village. I don't know. But I think they went through enough trouble to establish Anne that they could keep her around. But I'll talk about her more in a minute. I will go ahead and move on to Gebel. And this is another interesting one. You might think that Gebel's story is done. And for the future, you're probably correct, maybe not. But in the prequel sense, I think he's the main character. Gebel was originally the main protagonist for this game, according to the art book. But before it was decided that Miriam would be the one instead. And the role he ended up in became basically Richter's role for Ritual of the Night. This leaves us in a situation where essentially Symphony of the Night is happening before Rondo of Blood. And I think for the prequel, we'll be the equivalent of Rondo with Gebel. I think that Gebel will be one of the main playable characters, and that will be the series' version of the beginning of Dracula X, how Rondo originally preceded Symphony. We're kind of doing it backwards this time. The equivalence is clear to me. In the past, he is raised up as a shardbinder, but doesn't take it to as much. He doesn't take to it as much, but he has proficiency with weapons, and his exorcist blood prevents him from having the crystal in him grow quickly. He fights and kills almost the entirety of the Alchemists Guild, along with likely demons. However, after doing so, he is possessed, or in this case, directly controlled by Gremory, who is the equivalent of Shaft's possession, to be the lord of a new castle. And the bad ending setup and taking out the moon, like Shaft's orb, etc., are all obviously similar to Richter's situation, with the Zangetsu being both the vampire killer and the holy glasses item in that situation. So who else is helping Gebel in this prequel setup? I think probably an exorcist, and Zangetsu will be involved as well, just not as directly. During the course of this game, I think we'll learn more about the people who passed during this time, more about Zangetsu's past, Dominique's parents, and so on. One of the exorcists that are playable may very likely be one of Dominique's parents. If not, of course, the people that are closely involved in the war against the demons that are going on. So we'll see from her and them in some manner, I'm sure. Moving on next is Gremory. Gremory is death, obviously, and of course Shaft a little bit, as I was talking about. My old pun is that death is now a grim memory. Get it? Grim memory, Gremory. Okay. It was clever once upon a time. Anyway, for prequels and sequels, I believe that she will be around for most past and future iterations of the game because of the Zangetsu being the Moon Cleaver sword. Or some iteration or play on it will be necessary for her to be effectively fought each time. Which is, a little strange when you think about it. I don't think we have a Dracula yet, but we do have a powerful demon who is probably going to be recurring over time, who needs this heirloom weapon to be fought over and over. I don't think we have a Dracula yet, and I'll talk about that a little bit more if I remember to. I've got most things written down here, so bear with me as I get to that later. But Anne is next. Anne, she's who appears next in the story, and she actually appears before Dominique after all. Her involvement in the past will be none at all, of course, because she's a child. But for the future, I think she will be used. Her spot in Ritual is a bit perplexing, as she doesn't have any large story significance yet. Zombie Mike, my fellow community leader, believes that it was originally planned for Dominique to use her just as the alchemists used children as catalysts for the crystal growth. He thinks it may have been decided that was too dark and therefore it was cut, and I think this is possible, but maybe her role all along was just to have someone at the shop when necessary for Dominique to be replaced by someone, so that it wouldn't be a random character out of nowhere when they did that. I think it would have given more impact and context, and really drive home the idea that they were using kids in those experiments, and just a really grisly, just disgusting way they were doing that. And that is, that's pretty rough for a T-rated game, and it may not be as dark as Iga really wanted to go with the story. He might be right about that, but I don't know. That would be something to explore, but who even knows if it was a part of it originally? I can't say. What's also of particular interest here with Anne, potentially, I think it is said that Dominique showed her, I know it was said actually, I remember it, Dominique showed her how to purify the shards. What we're looking at with Anne here is, I believe, an exorcist in the making, though she will be hurt by finding out Dominique's true nature. I don't think that happened yet in the story, which will be immediately past the events of the close of the game. Eventually they're going to have to tell Anne that Dominique was quite evil, and that's going to suck for her. But Her similarities, design-wise, to Sonia Belmont are, fairly clear, and people have remarked on that a bit over the years, in the hair and the outfit coloration. Some also think that she'll be a young Maria type, more immediately, but I doubt that over other possibilities. I think she's a great potential whip character, and a chance at another take, indeed, at Sonia, who never quite worked out, and I imagine that stuck with Iga as something regrettable for him, that Sonia was a cool character in Castlevania that just never got her time in the sun in a way that I think the character design really deserved, because Legends just didn't do very well, and it was kind of a weird spot in the story. It couldn't really be included because it did some things that didn't work, and it was a little bit of an embarrassment, but the character design itself was cool. It just wasn't, it didn't work out very well. So to take someone like that, kind of an equivalent female whip character, I think is something great to explore for the future. And I think Iga has already kind of done that in a few spaces with Ritual of the Night, of kind of doing some things that he, wanted another shot at. But anyway, let's move on to Dominique. And Dominique's a big one for me. Most of you that know me, know I was a big Dominique fan once upon a time. Now not so much, because she turned out to be a bad girl. Can't stand behind her anymore. But I think Dominique's story is done with Ritual of the Night's close. But some background for context with what I was just talking about. I met Koji Igarashi on his 50th birthday in Texas, and I was wearing this shirt, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's Castlevania 3, and it's got the main characters all around, and I made sure to wear this and showed it to Igarashi. I also had a Sorrow necklace design, and it was a great time. But anyway, I was wearing this shirt, and I had him sitting right in front of me for an hour, and I could say basically whatever I could think of once I finally resolved to talk to him. We were supposed to be there to have cocktails, but I completely forgot to even order a drink, because I was just like, what do you say to Iga? You have this X amount of time. What do you do? So once I finally started talking, we got to go on talking about the Netflix show and all that. And one main thing I did bring up was how dissatisfied I was with how Sypha was changed for the Netflix show. And I pointed to my shirt before the translation even came for this, and he held his head in his hands, and in agreement to what I was saying, he was like, oh, as soon as I pointed to her. So the direction I go with this in the conversation is that I was looking forward to a positive protagonist church character in Dominique, since it's so unusual otherwise to have a positive Christian character in games, besides the traditional main canon Belmont characters in Castlevania. Not Netflix Belnade's characters are completely different, because they're the nomadic Roma people, the gypsy types. The Belnade's characters in the Castlevania series actually work closely with the church or are from it, but that's not the case here. So I was looking forward to Dominique being used that way, because she's already established as being from the church and exorcist, and even in the demo, it's very clear that's what she's doing. When I said all that, Igarashi-san, he settled awkwardly in his chair, and at the time, I thought it was just kind of the weirdness of the overall situation we were in was why he did that, because fans are so candidly talking to him and surrounding him in such a pressured and a way that he's probably not used to. And man, I had to translate, every bit of it. It was probably rough in general, and that's all I thought it was. But turns out, I know exactly why he was comfortable now. The story was already set, and Iga didn't know how to say this to me. Dominique from the beginning was going to be the main bad guy. I've just recently heard this from Mana, that this was the case. That's why he reacted that way. Obviously, I would not want things changed for me, of course, and I just love these guys for how much they care about a random fan. Just to know that Iga was bothered, and, it hurt him that, he didn't know how to let me down. So I think at the time, his response was something like, Well, we in Japan, we don't understand like world religion that well. We just kind of work it in and do what we can with it, and it satisfied me. I was just happy to talk to him, and I didn't think anything else of it. But all this happened. I was coming from a place of being a fan with pretty unusual and strange hopes, so don't blame him at all for how things turned out. But let me move on and say this. I think that Dominique is the best villain that he's ever written. Even if I don't personally like the character anymore, I think that it's the best bad guy that he's written. And of course, your first thought is Dracula, but Ige didn't create Dracula, and some of the stories he made for Dracula were his work. But as far as characters that he's made, I think she's number one. Her motivation is airtight to me. The deception was just right without being too obvious or too obscure or out of nowhere. And her design, along with this, will have the character be more popular than if things went in the direction I was looking for. So I obviously recognize that as well. If what I wanted had been done, Dominique would not be as big of a success as she is. And she is a pretty big success, I think. She's pretty close to Bloodless as being like a popular female character besides Miriam, which is great. And that being said, yes, I think that her role is done. She's essentially like the Barlow of the story rather than a Dracula. Barlow's from Order of Ecclesia, is how I'm seeing it. And she does forsake God like Matthias and all that, but I think she's a one-time summoner of power rather than the recurring main villain of the series. It actually feels like we haven't seen that character yet, the Dracula, besides Gremory coming back as the adversary to the Zangetsu clan, like I was talking about earlier. For the prequel, I don't think she will have a main role, but will be around. She'll be around to cement and fill out her motivations. I can't even fully blame her for how she turned out. As a 15-year-old, your parents fight and die for God in a way that seems thankless to you, with God doing nothing to save them and you from your fate, and as yourself a child whose faith has not had its chance to mature. Kids are prone to dismissal and rebellion while being raised in a strict faith household as it is, so it would no doubt push her to some extremes. I think it's a shame that she never moved past that, but it's too late now. The good news here is that there are, we assume, a number of other exorcists who are mostly, if not in whole, not corrupt and doing good things as part of a not evil church. Dominique's bestiary description gives me some hope here as well, describing her as a fool that thought she could challenge God. So that's a nice thing there to point out. But yeah, like I say, I really I understand her story. I think it's really solid, and I can't blame her at all for how she turned out. To be a 15-year-old where your parents are killed by demons, fighting for God, but there's no apparent immediate evidence that, number one, God is rewarding you or thanking you or giving you some, comfort like directly for that. And as a 15-year-old, you're already questioning all of that stuff. So why would you keep on the straight and narrow? There's very little incentive for her to like stay true at that point. So unfortunately, it pushed her to some extremes, which are understandable. So I think that's a good setup for a villain, and I completely understand it. Great job. But anyways, moving on to Alfred. I was completely wrong about Alfred and Dominique. Shout outs to Mr. Well Done. But we all knew that Alfred was more than what he appeared to be. Like, there's no way he was going to be as predictable of a bad guy as he looked like he was. It seemed too obvious that he would be the true antagonist of the story, with the semi-Dracula look that he has. I think with Ritual of the Night, his story is done, of course. But we could still see quite a bit of him in the prequel story, and even a game before that, like pre-prequel. His story will be tied closely with the as yet unidentified alchemist that wrote all of those bookcase notes in Ritual of the Night. Alfred is the old friend spoken of in those books, so we could become more acquainted with Alfred's struggles behind the scenes to try to stop the original demon summoning and trying to clean up after it. I doubt he would be a main playable or a playable in Ritual of the Night even for the DLC, but a likely candidate for extra characters in other games prior to this one. So more about the... there's a lot of things we don't know about the Alchemists Guild. That is where a lot of these blanks have to be filled in, because we don't know where, what, why, how a lot of that stuff went down. So that's quite a bit that we need to learn, like especially about how Gebel fought them, and I'll be going over that soon. So moving on now to OD, Orlok Dracula, and of course, if you haven't had this pointed out to you yet, which I didn't even think about it until recently myself, OD backwards is Dio, JoJo's. Yes, I didn't catch on to that immediately, so very, very, very cool, very funny. Anyway, for OD, besides us just saying he's Alucard, let's see what else we know. It's hard to know just how seriously to take this character, but I have to assume that he's in it for the long term, and that we can take at surface value that he is an immortal vampire, as he calls himself. This likely means he's something of the level of Castlevania's Dracula, where after he's beaten or killed, he comes back, unless a very difficult process to destroy his soul is carried out. I think we'll see OD in many games before and after Ritual, including the prequel. He'll likely be in most instances of the castle, but not usually directly involved. I could see him generally being an observer, mentor, quest giver, and so on. His equivalent role to Castlevania would be like Saint Germain, or as just an old vampire instead of a time traveler, of course. Even though in his description in the bestiary it says that he has power over time, so maybe he can time travel, or it may just be talking about the shard ability itself, standstill, which is the JoJo's time stop thing. It's hard to know yet if he's how much control over time he has. So he could more literally be Saint Germain. I don't know. Bloodless is next, and I'm including her here because I have a feeling this will be a recurring like mid-villain, so to speak, like Carmilla was in Castlevania, appearing in a lot of the games. The similars are obvious between those two, so I don't think it's necessary to go into explaining that. I think she'll be a mainstay as being an ability character, as ability that characters use to, since blood is titular in Bloodstained, and having blood abilities and a themed boss about blood makes sense going forward. So I think Bloodless may be kind of tied to the identity of the brand of Bloodstained a little bit, because it's a thematic boss that makes sense to keep around. I think it would also be amusing if she was somehow an old flame of OD's. I think that would be a funny storyline. If they were exes or something, I think that would be pretty funny. As a side note, I think that besides her and Gremory, it's very hard to pin down if any other bosses from Ritual of the Night will be seen again. None of the others really give me an obvious overall series feeling, except possibly how Vipar is almost comparably iconic, being the first boss of the game and the most popular and discussed for a while. They worked quite hard on Vipar 2, and it would be a shame to lose that history and the great design that he is. In that way, Vipar could occupy kind of a Gurgoth kind of space, if not a Carmilla Bloodless style one. So kind of a big recurring boss that's like a set piece boss that's the bigger one that you see fairly often in Castlevania games. Maybe not all of them, but pretty frequently. And Ritual of the Night could stand to have more large bosses. As some people have pointed out, they were a little disappointed that the only big, gory, crazy-looking screen-filling bosses were few and far between, which I can understand that. So more big stuff is always good. Next is Bale. We're getting near the end here of the characters. So as I said earlier, I don't think we had our Dracula yet, and no, I don't think it's Bale either. I see him as something else, something significant, of course. Specifically, I see him as the chaos of the game, like what Soma is likewise fighting against in the the Sorrow games. He's kind of representing the main demon essence of the castle and its summoning, being the king of the demons and an affront to God, but he's kind of a flat evil entity and a concept rather than a recurring character villain. Like, it's not really you're writing and, you know, developing a character. He's kind of just like a fairly one-dimensional, like, this is the evil of the story. Kind of like how chaos is the concept and the idea of something rather than a character story for a villain. I predict that in some games we'll see Bale. I think we'll see him sometimes and sometimes not. He may not be in the prequel game I'm proposing at all, at least not directly, as after all the summoning wasn't truly fully realized yet. But it was, you know, pretty chaotic back with the cleanup operation they had to do with the damage and chaos it caused with the first very sloppy summoning that the Alchemists did. Last character is Iga. If we canonize Iga, which I would be totally fine with, I think it would be neat and appropriate to make him OD's father. And similar to OD, but going even further with the idea of being uninvolved, except as a distant, powerful entity that sparingly intervenes and doesn't directly engage with the other characters. But like he says in the game, what is the line? I just fought him in the game. It's like, as long as I am summoned, I will keep resurrecting. Or it's really good. I love the line a lot. It's Iga speaking English, so you have to love it. It's basically him saying that as long as he's wanted, he will keep resurrecting. So, shout outs to Iga. I would love to see that. He's a a character that comes back in Bloodstained, or maybe just like referential like material, or like you see it in the item descriptions or whatever, like XYZ of Iga, you know, as like the ring of Iga, you know, things like that. Anyways, I guess I could mention the backer design bosses, the Carpenter, Millionaire's Bane, and the Revenant. These things are pretty amusing, and I think fit in Ritual of the Night just fine. But I don't think we'll have I don't think they'll have an overarching connection to the story, except with possibly Revenants as a thing, or even slot machines if they want to go in directions to continue poking fun at Castlevania. You know, they could use the Revenants and the slot machines that way to keep, you know, making jabs at CV, but I don't think they will, and I don't think it's necessary. I think we've kind of made the point now with Castlevania, and I don't want it to be too dead of a horse that you just keep beating it down. But I would be fine with it too, because it's still pretty funny. But anyway, moving on from the characters, the wrap up and the main design ideas of the prequel and the sequel game. There's two separate things here I'm talking about. So for the first game that takes place before Ritual of the Night, which I could see being named something like Dawn of the Curse, inferring both its prequel nature and reference to Dawn of Sorrow. And here is the scenario I can imagine. The game is more collaborative than solo, so more like Portrait of Ruin or Curse of the Moon or Castlevania 3-ish, rather than Symphony and Aria. And the collection of playable characters can include Gebel, an exorcist we haven't met yet, Zangetsu, Alfred, or even Johannes. The game is not limited to a castle, but instead an outpouring across the land of demons that starts at the Alchemists Guild and spreads out around. Similar to how you began in Ecclesia and have a world map of stages. The characters all have different motivations and even disagreements, but work together to clean up an emergency situation. So they're kind of just buddies in the foxhole, basically. I think the church plays a bigger part in this, as they are said to in Ritual of the Night. I think we'll see Dominique's parents at some point, if one of them is not themselves just outright a playable character, and the young version of Dominique herself as well, as the story firsthand of the alchemist experiments. At first it may seem like everything is already told here from Ritual, like there's no need for a prequel, but there's a lot we don't know about Zangetsu's past, how he ties into these events, like the friend that he lost, his eye, his arm, all that stuff, and how the church as an entity really works in all this, including how Zangetsu trusts them and their use of magic and works with them. Like, how does he give them a pass? Like, if you think about Zangetsu and Dominique's relationship from the beginning of Ritual of the Night, he's clearly okay with her sorcery and her allegiance with the church. So, you know, why does he want to work with them? Like, how did that come to be? Because he seems like a naturally distrustful person. So, he might know them from just being a hunter, and they're hunters too. But I think it will be, you know, neat and interesting to explore how that happened. So Gebel and the Alchemist's trajectory here seems set, but there is little we know about the unnamed alchemist character that was, you know, writing those tomes, except what he did to the children. And perhaps the most important thing here to explore regarding that group is, as mentioned in the notes, there are several higher-ups above this person that ordered all of this. The note writer tells us that these things were not him acting alone or of his own volition. Some amount of people above him were quite a bit more corrupt than him. So who are they? Are they truly dead now? How did Gebel dispatch them? I imagine this was potentially a harder fight than at first we would think, because you have to think about, if these guys were above Alfred's level of power in the guild, they outranked him significantly, and they would have no inclination to fight fair or hold back like Alfred does. So I don't think it was a trivial matter for Gebel to take them down. I think these characters were each at least as, if not probably more powerful than Alfred. So that would be an interesting thing to explore. I think that in-game for each character in the prequel would involve them being separated and doing their requisite pieces to end it all. Gebel destroys the Alchemists Guild, Dominique seals Gremory's movement and defeats her, and the church representatives defeat the other major demons besides Gremory, after the three of them had previously cleaned up all of the minor ones and opened up the path to each of them doing these things. Kind of like each taking a turn to allow the other person to go the step further in their quest to kind of play off of each other and let the other one go more forward. Like, you kind of change roles as you go through the story, or maybe it's an active switch situation like Portrait or Curse of the Moon, or you know, it could be episodic. It could be a lot of different things, but I like the idea of it being collaborative, since the main story of Ritual is very much a solo ordeal. And when I mentioned other major demons there that the church was fighting, this could include perhaps anything from the Gautier, but it seems to not include Bale in the first summoning, because of how it wasn't quite complete, yet of course still quite nasty apparently. And the very end of it all, beyond that, could be everyone coming together to help Gebel, or not, depending on a potential corruption mechanic for that game, if Ego wants to go into that during this game. The final fight could be against the top level alchemist leaders, where Gebel needs a boost from the other characters, kind of like in Curse of the Moon, where everybody's helping Miriam. Or it could be against Gebel himself if he becomes mad with power, like I was talking about in the alternate bad ending timeline. However, I think the corruption consequences would be better explored with, again, the potential sequel. So let's move on to that. So likely Miriam's second and last foray into Bloodstained, I think, is the sequel we're talking about. And this theoretical game is the one I was talking about, where I said Igarashi could start taking more risks with design and consequences of the player's decisions. As we know, it turns out that the shards corrupting Miriam was a bit of a ruse in Ritual, and that possibility may be sealed entirely by Johannes. But it doesn't exclude the possibility that she could decide on her own independently of the cursed influence on herself, to do whatever she wants. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, of course, as they say. And as far as we know, she's the ultimate shardbinder, and perhaps the strongest protagonist we've seen in one of these games ever. I think story-wise, and just adding everything together, you could make a case for Miriam being like demigod status at the end of Ritual of the Night. She's ridiculously strong. She took down the pagan King of Kings Bale by herself. I mean, using the demonic power. So even if her corruption is halted in a physical sense, where it directly influences her decision making, she still has her own mental faculties, and she has to somehow reconcile that much power and that much responsibility. So I think that would be something to explore for another game, of kind of the struggle internally of how you wrestle with that as a normal person, having that much power. Can you be trusted? It's almost like a comic book story of like mutants or whatever, like how everyone finds out about Miriam and like how she did this, or does she keep it a secret? How does she go on her life, and like are people okay with her? Do they find out at all? Those kinds of things. Essentially all characters from Ritual of the Night would return in this sequel that are still alive, and we could see the setup of a playable, or more important, Anne here, like I was saying. The whole thing could be like a Julius mode in Dawn of Sorrow, where the final boss is Miriam, like with Selma in that game, depending on how choices are made. If the player stays down a clear, good path, again, the boss could be Bale, after some other summoner's efforts, or against what ends up being our Dracula. If they want to make, that the path, the next game could introduce the recurring villain, and that could be the boss of the game, because I think that spot still needs to be filled, if not filled by Miriam herself, because that's kind of where things could head. I'm kind of sort of alluding to that here, which I don't think that's going to be true, but it is something they could do. Iga could even experiment with genres and the way the games play here too. It could be more or less of an action game. It could be more or less of an RPG, or something entirely different, like a full 3D character action game, or a completely 2D turn-based RPG game. I know that he has different ideas than the old formula in his head, and I think at some point we should move forward with those ideas, because I know he has things he wants to do. I'd hate to see the genre we're currently in limit what he wants to do. There can and will always be opportunities to do more Igavania games, but if the story and scenario doesn't fit that genre, then it's completely cool to me to try some other things. I believe that's what we would have seen with the 1999 Demon War game if that had happened. Because if you think about it, the 1999 game was supposed to be a war. It wasn't like a solo castle intrusion game. It was about several characters fighting a huge, army of demons in a final battle against Dracula. It's not like just Julius versus just Dracula. It was like a huge deal, and you see the remnants and the consequences of that in the Sorrow games. So it would have been a genre change, and I think we know at this point that Harmony of Despair was like a prototype, or was going to be that game, and we know how different that was. So anyway, even with the prequel game, that may be a genre change, because all along I've been thinking that a 1 to 3 character exploration action game doesn't really fit the setting of a war against demons, and a war against demons is essentially what both the 1999 game and the Bloodstained prequel would be. Like you're doing the Demon War in 99, and the Demon War brought about by the Alchemists doing the shitty summoning thing they did. So again, like fairly similar prequel reflections there. Like you have like the Aria and Dawn set up, and you have the Rondo and Symphony set up. So it's like not just Rondo and not just Aria and Dawn, but like Aria and 1999, because that is the prequel to Aria. Because I think, like I said, Ritual of the Night is currently the Aria of Sorrow. So yeah, this setup, this whole thing I'm saying, it could be purposeful so that Iga could finally use his 1999 ideas. Who knows? I don't. I'm just a fan. But it would be cool. I mean, if this finally gives him an outlet to avenge the death of Julius, to avenge the death of his 1999 ideas by doing them in Bloodstained, like going out with those war ideas and the genre changes and things, because now we can do that. The setup has been made, and the Igavania has been done. So I think that about does it. Let me know what you think in the comments. or in my forum thread I'm going to make about this. I have other ideas, but these are the main ones that I wanted to talk about and wanted to explore. I think it's really open-ended what could happen now, and I apologize if I was looking down the whole time because I was reading my notes and going through this, but there's a lot of possibilities. The future is exciting. Anything can happen. I think that IGA is satisfied with where things are, and I don't think there's any reason to change the genre, reason to shake up things significantly. There's no reason to corrupt Miriam. There's no reason to make things super dark, or the really crazy radical corruption ideas and the options of morality paths and all that. He doesn't have to do any of that stuff. He can keep making straight-laced Igavania solo exploration games, and we're gonna love him. I'm gonna love him. That's what I want too. But I want him to do what he wants to do, and I'm completely for the idea of things changing up if he wants to change them up. And because there's so much potential here, and I think the story is cool. I think the story is good. I think the villains and the heroes that he wrote are good, and can't wait to see what happens. The community has been awesome for everything, and I can't thank them enough for what they've done and the art they've put forward and the work they've done. So thank you all for that. And yep, this is me signing off. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you around on the internets. Bye bye.